In almost every alternate reality, Mark Grayson succumbs to darkness, not because he is inherently evil, but because the fragile balance that keeps him tethered to humanity is disrupted. One of the most crucial factors that shaped the main timeline Mark is the timing of his powers. In the main timeline, Mark didn't develop his viltrumite abilities until he was 17, significantly delaying his father's plan to reveal his true heritage. This seemingly small difference gave him something invaluable: time. Time to grow up as a normal human, to experience life as an ordinary teenager, and to form strong emotional connections before being thrust into the brutal reality of his bloodline. For 17 years, Mark idolized superheroes and dreamed of being one, believing in the ideals of justice, selflessness, and compassion. He saw himself as human first, and by the time his powers awakened, his identity was already shaped by that perspective. But in other realities, things may not have played out this way. If an alternate Mark had developed his powers at a much younger age, Omni-Man's approach would have been drastically different. Instead of raising his son as a human, allowing him to live among ordinary people, he would have begun training him immediately in the viltrumite way, teaching him dominance, strength, and conquest as fundamental truths rather than burdens to resist. A younger, alternate Mark, one without years of human experience, wouldn't have had the same moral framework to question his father's teachings. He would have grown up believing that the strong must rule over the weak, that compassion is a hindrance, and that Earth was never truly his home. It was simply the first step in his greater destiny. A Mark trained from childhood would have been conditioned not only to accept the viltrumite way, but to embrace it fully. Some alternate versions of Mark would have seen Omni-Man not as an opposing force, but as a mentor guiding them to their ultimate purpose. These versions would not have had deep emotional attachments to their mother, their friends, or Earth itself. Where the main Mark saw his human connections as his greatest strength, these alternate Marks raised in the viltrumite mindset would see them as disposable, even burdensome. Omni-Man wouldn't have had to explain Earth's weaknesses. These alternate Marks would have seen them firsthand, growing up with the belief that humans were fragile, inferior creatures in desperate need of control. This alternate upbringing would have also eliminated the moment of conflict that defined the main timeline Mark. The heartbreaking realization that his father was not the hero he thought he was. In the main timeline, Mark's entire worldview was shattered when Omni-Man revealed his true purpose, and his immediate reaction was to resist, not just because it was the right thing to do, but because it felt like a betrayal. He wasn't just rejecting the viltrumite empire, he was rejecting the father he had trusted his whole life. That emotional turmoil is what made him fight back so fiercely. But in a reality where Mark was raised as a viltrumite from the beginning, there would be no betrayal, only duty. He wouldn't need to be convinced, he would already believe. If Omni-Man had approached his son with patience rather than raw brutality, he might have slowly worn down Mark's resistance, convincing him that the viltrumite way wasn't just necessary, but righteous. Some alternate versions of Mark might have been won over not through violence, but through subtle manipulation. Mark is not immune to persuasion. He has always struggled with self-doubt, constantly questioning whether he is strong enough, smart enough, or even capable of making the right decisions. In a timeline where his father nurtures these doubts rather than breaking him physically, an alternate Mark might convince himself that resisting is foolish, that Earth is doomed without him guiding it, and that his father was never the villain, only a misunderstood visionary. Instead of feeling betrayed, he might feel enlightened, embracing his viltrumite heritage willingly. But even without his father's influence, there are other ways alternate Marks can lose their way. If their mother dies early, if Eve is never part of their lives, or if their closest friends are taken from them, these Marks become unmoored. Their deep love for others is what keeps them grounded. It is their greatest strength, but also their greatest vulnerability. In timelines where loss crushes them, alternate Marks don't just lose their loved ones, they lose themselves. They could come to see emotions as a weakness, something that only brings pain. Some versions of Mark may even begin to resent their human side, viewing it as the very thing that made them suffer. And if there is no one left to remind them of their humanity, they may decide it was never worth preserving in the first place. Fear also plays a role in shaping evil versions of Mark. In many realities, they aren't won over by ideology, but forced into submission. The Viltrumites are an empire of brutal enforcers, and if an alternate Mark ever faced their full wrath without any hope of victory, he might choose survival over resistance. He has always been a hero willing to suffer for what's right, but in alternate worlds where Omni-Man never leaves, or where Viltrumites descend upon Earth in full force, the horror of what they can do might break his spirit. He could convince himself that the only way to protect Earth is to rule it with an iron fist. In his mind, he might not even see himself as a villain, only a necessary force keeping humanity from being crushed under Viltrumite rule. But perhaps the most dangerous versions of Mark are the ones who never struggle at all, those raised as Viltrumites from the start. These Marks never experience doubt, never question the Empire, and never have a mother like Debbie to remind them that love is not a weakness but a strength. They would be the perfect soldiers, more powerful than Omni-Man and more fanatically devoted to Viltrum than even Frag. Unlike Omni-Man, who hesitated out of love for his wife and son, these alternate Marks would have no hesitation, no remorse, no conflict. They wouldn't need convincing, they would already believe. And yet, the possibilities are endless. In the vast multiverse, there exist countless versions of Mark Grayson, each shaped by circumstances as unpredictable as they are varied. Some Marks may have turned evil for reasons no one could anticipate, perhaps an alien influence, a betrayal too deep to overcome, or a timeline where he was raised not by Omni-Man but by an even greater threat. There could be a Mark who rules the galaxy with an iron grip, a Mark who seeks vengeance rather than conquest, or even a Mark who becomes something far worse than a simple tyrant. The infinite possibilities mean that no single factor defines his fall. What makes the main timeline Mark different is not just his strength or his potential, but his ability to question, to struggle, to feel. It is his pain that makes him human. It is his losses that make him fight harder to protect what remains. Without those struggles, without those emotional scars, he would be nothing more than another Viltrumite tyrant. In the end, what separates a hero from a conqueror isn't power, it's the choice to wield it with restraint.